Today we are going to learn about decision making. Decision making is one of the important function of a manager. While dealing in the organization, manager has to take one or the other decisions. It is not only applicable for a manager, even for a layman, the person has to take a lot of decision in day-to-day life. Right from what to eat, what to wear, which career to choose, which faculty to choose, which discipline to choose. So nobody cannot escape from taking any kind of decision. Manager has to take lot of decision in the organization. Right from which faculty to appoint, how to delegate the works in the faculty, how to allot the time, everywhere, how to allocate the budget, everywhere he has to take a decision. So it is very important for a manager to know about decision making. Now when we are talking about decision making, let us see what decision making is about. Decision is nothing but choosing options. We have very much options available to us, and from that which option will be more suitable, which alternative will be more suitable, we need to identify and we need to select. So basically it is a process of identifying the alternative, choosing the alternative which is most effective, and taking a decision. So when taking a decision, first we need to identify the alternatives. Now there are list of alternatives available. So while selecting the alternatives, one has to have a lot of knowledge about those available alternatives. Are those alternatives fulfilling the need of the organization? Are the alternatives which has been chosen is as per the objectives? So like this, taking into consideration all these factors, one need to identify the alternatives. After identifying the alternatives, one has to select the best alternative. So while selecting the alternatives, one has to decide the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of each alternative. So in the process of selecting the alternative, what one is doing, he is choosing the best, most effective alternative from the available alternatives. Now after selection of the alternatives, one has to see the consequence as well. Whatever alternative one has chosen, will it give a long-term benefit to the organization, or will it give only a short-term benefit, whether it is feasible or not, or whether it will require a lot of resources or not. All these factors need to be considered while selecting the alternative. So in the process of selection of alternative, what the manager is doing, he is choosing the alternative. So first one has to decide what to do, where the decision is required, and then he has to decide the identifying the alternative, and from that which alternative will be most useful, most beneficial for the organization, that one need to choose. So in the process of decision making, one has to first decide the decision has to be made, and after realization of that one has to take a decision, one need to identify the alternative. Now let us see the definition of decision making. It is a process of examining options, comparing options, and choosing the course of action. Say for example, if any student want to choose a stream, first what he will do, he will find out what are the available options where he can enroll himself. Now there are various options like arts, commerce, science. Then from those options he will compare which will give a more benefit to him. Say for example, if he goes in arts faculty, what are the career available? If he goes in science, what are the career future perspectives for that particular stream? Or if he go for commerce, what are the career perspectives in that particular stream? So what he is doing, he is comparing those three options available to him. So after comparison, he will make his mind where he wants to go, whether he want to go for arts faculty, whether he wants to go for commerce or a science faculty, considering all those pros and cons of each discipline. Now this is in case of a layman. Let us see the example of a manager. Same is the case with the manager. Say for example, if any principal of the school want to start a school with other boards, like now they are offering SSC board, and now they are planning to have other boards, like they want to start a CBSE board. So in that case, why they feel this decision should be taken? Because nowadays, looking at the situation, it is very much required to have different boards, because in SSC boards the number of students are not more, and parents are not preferring that particular board. So manager wants to take a decision about whether to start a CBSE board in the same school. So in order to take a decision about whether to start a CBSE board in the same school, what the manager will do, he will compare the things. Are there any CBSE schools located in that particular area? If it is so, then will the student will also come to my school, because the school which is located in that particular area may be reputed, may be well known. So what he is doing, he is comparing whether he will be getting the student, whether he will be getting the faculties for teaching that particular board. So what he is doing, he is comparing, and in the process of comparing, he is also finding the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of introducing that particular board. Once these pros and cons has been found out, then he has to take a decision whether it is feasible, whether it is advisable to start a school with CBSE board. So what he is doing, he is finding the alternatives, examining the alternatives, comparing the alternatives, and then decides a course of action. So as we saw in the process of decision making, first one has to decide, the decision has to be made. Now if we consider the same case, what is the decision is to be made? The decision is to be made is that whether to start a CBSE board in a same school. The manager has identified the need of the hour, and he has to take a decision about whether to start a CBSE board in his school. After deciding, the decision has to be made, one has to find out the alternatives. So what the manager is doing, he is finding the alternatives available. Now alternatives can be number of teachers available, alternative can be new curriculum which is there for the CBSE schools. Will it be okay for the teachers to teach, or will they find it very difficult to implement that particular curriculum? So what he is doing, he is analyzing, he is comparing the situation and then takes a decision. If he finds that yes, my teachers will run it successfully, he will decide a course of action by taking a decision to start a school with CBSE board. According to Duncan, a decision is a conscious choice to behave or to think in a particular way in a given set of circumstances. In this particular definition given by Duncan, he mentions that it is a conscious choice. Now why it is a conscious choice? Because it's not very easy to take a decision. One has to have certain kind of expertise, one has to have certain kind of experience, one has to have the vision about to see the pros and cons, to see the consequences. So decision making is a conscious process. It requires a lot of mental activity, like visualizing the things, finding out the consequences. So that is why we are labeling it as a conscious process. When a choice has been made, a decision has been made. Now why it is said so? Because when the person decides anything to do, there are so much options available, he has to make a choice, and in the process of making choice, he has to take a decision, because there are so many options available, so many choices available, and from that one has to decide which one will be suitable. So it is a process of choosing a course of action from more alternatives. There are so many alternatives available, and from that he has to decide which one will be more effective. Decision making is mostly linked with planning function of the manager. Say for example, if the principal want to conduct an orientation program for a teacher, for that he requires a lot of planning. And while doing that particular planning, he has to think of various alternatives. On which day the orientation should be given, how many teachers should be involved in that particular orientation, who will be the resource person, how much resources will be requiring for conducting that orientation program, who will be the resource person, when to do, how to do. In all this process of planning, he has to take a decision at every step. So we can say that in the planning function of the manager, he has to take a lot of decision. So planning involves a decision. We cannot segregate that planning will be done without deciding. So it is mostly linked with the planning function of the manager. Same way, at every functions like delegating, organizing, everywhere he has to take a decision. Say for example, in the process of delegation, in the process of allotting the work to the teachers, manager has to decide whom to allot what kind of work, who will be the most suitable person for that particular work. So in the process of delegating, he has to take decision at every step. In the function of organizing, when the manager does the organizing, in that process also he has to take a lot of decision. Say for example, how to organize the resources, how to integrate the resources, what are the resources available for the organization, how to manage those resources, everywhere he has to take a decision in the process of organizing. Same goes with the function of leading. While leading, what the manager does, he identify the person who will be leading that particular job. So in the process of identification itself, he has to take a decision. In the process of controlling how much resource to be allocated, how much resources should be kept aside for that particular task, there also in the process of controlling, the manager has to take lot of decision. So in all managerial activities, say from planning, organizing, controlling, directing, delegating, everywhere the manager has to take a decision. So we can say that decision making is required everywhere in each functions of the manager. Now let us see the process of decision making. Decision making is a step-by-step activity. It requires a lot of processes in decision making. When we say it is a step-by-step activity, the very first step is recognizing and defining the nature of decision situation. First, the manager need to be aware of where he want to take a decision. Say for example, first he need to realize there is a need of taking some decision. Say for example, the manager want to start a new school in his locality. The principal want to start a new class or a new school in his locality. So in that particular situation, what he is doing, he is actually realizing, awareing himself that there is a need of starting one more school in that particular area. So what he is doing, he is recognizing and defining the nature of decision situation. What is this nature of decision situation? That he has realized that there is a need of starting a new school in that particular area. So he has recognized the need and he has identified the need and then he is defining the need. Now in the process of defining the need, what the manager is doing, he is deciding where to build a school, in which area to build the school, till how much standard the school will be. So he is analyzing the whole situation, he is identifying the situation and then deciding to start a new school in that particular area. So that is the very first step. One has to make himself aware of the need of the situation and then for that particular need he has to take a decision. So once the manager realizes that he has to start the school, next steps comes is identifying the alternatives. What are the various alternatives available, in which area to start the school, what are the resources available to me, what will be the budget required for that building that particular school, that he has to think in the second step of identifying the alternatives. Is there any school situated in that particular locality, in that particular area? So that also he need to think in identifying the alternatives. If one want to start a school, whom to give a contract for this particular school? So what the manager is doing, he is identifying the alternatives, and in the process of identification he is deciding the area, he is deciding the resources available, he is also deciding whom to give the contract of building the school. So what he is doing, he is identifying the alternatives. In the process of choosing the best alternative, the manager has to visualize the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of those available alternatives. Say for example, regarding the resources, what are the resources available to me? Can I manage some resources from the society? Can the manager ask some grants from the government? These are the various alternatives available when we are talking about the resources. So from that particular available resources, again he has to make a choice whether he should apply for a grant to the government, or there is no need to apply for a grant because the management has a lot of funds available for building the school. So from these 2-3 options he has to make a decision which will be most effective. Same is in the case of to whom to give the contract for building the school. There are n number of options available. From that, which one is the best alternative, that he has to decide. So at third step, what the manager is doing, he is choosing the best alternative. So in the process of choosing the best alternative, what the manager is doing, he is finding the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages of each alternative, and from that particular alternative which is best suitable for the manager, which is best suitable for the need, which is best suitable for fulfilling the objectives, that he is considering, and then accordingly the manager chooses the best alternative which is most effective. After selecting the best alternative, the manager has to find out the consequences of each alternative. Say for example, if he has thought of starting a new school in that particular area, he need to visualize, he also need to think about whether in that particular vicinity, whether in that particular area, whether in that particular locality, he will get a number of student or not, or is it really fulfilling that particular society's needs or not. That also manager has to decide. He has to visualize the consequences, whether the faculty which will be requiring for running that particular school will he be getting easily or not. So those things in advance he has to analyze, he has to visualize, and while visualizing he need to also think of the consequences of that particular alternatives. After deciding the consequences, after analyzing the consequences, the last step comes is choosing, that is nothing but decision making. He has to take a course of action from that particular alternative. He has to decide what to do, whether to start the school in that area or not. That will be the final decision the manager will do in the process of decision making. So what we saw just now, in the process of decision making, there are 5 steps involved. First step is recognizing the situation, decision situation, and identifying the decision situation. After recognizing, next step comes is identifying the alternative. What are the various alternatives available to me? And then from those list of alternative, the person has to choose a best alternative, the effective alternative, the feasible alternative. Then after choosing the best alternative, manager also needs to analyze it by seeing the consequences of each alternative. Then after comparing, after analyzing, after seeing the consequences, the last step comes is taking a final decision. So in this process of decisions, these are the 5 steps involved. So we can say decision making is a step-by-step process. One has to go in the same process in the process of decision making. There are various factors which will have an influence on effective decision making. Perception, how you are perceiving the situation, that has a great effect on your decision making. If you are perceiving the situation wrongly, if you are perceiving the need wrongly, then it will have a negative effect on your decision making. It may happen that your decision may go wrong if you perceive it wrongly. So perception has a strong effect on your decision making. It is very much important to perceive the situation in a correct manner, because if you are doing mistake in understanding the situation and understanding the decision situation, then though you are very much good in taking a decision, because of wrong perception your decision may sometimes go wrong. So perception is very important. Correct perception of the situation is very important in the process of decision making. The second factor we can say is priority. Now there are n number of decisions the manager has to take in an organization. So from that particular n number of decision, which decision should be taken at the priority level, that also the manager has to decide. So it is very much important to decide or to know what is a priority work, and then accordingly that thing should be carried out in the organization. Many times it happens that the person is not capable enough to understand the priority of work. So which is the work which is very much urgent, very much important, that may be neglected if the person is doing mistake in deciding the priority. So it is very much important for a manager to prioritize the things, and it is very much important to identify the priority and then accordingly take a decision. Which decision is urgently required, which decision can be taken later, that also the manager has to understand. Then the third factor comes is a risk factor. It may happen that you may be a very good person in taking a decision. You may have done a lot of research. You may find out a lot of information regarding that particular decision, but there are many consequences may happen. There are many risks may involve in the process of decision making. You have done a lot of work, you have done a lot of research, but still there can be some natural calamities, there can be some risk in this particular process of decision making, which will have a great impact, great effect on your decision making. Fourth factor is the resources. It may happen that the manager is very good in taking a decision, but unless and until the manager have adequate resources, enough resources, his decision may not be effective. So he also need to consider the resources available in the process of decision making, because if the resources is not adequate, if the resources is not enough, then it may have a negative effect on your decision making. While taking any decision, it is very much important to know the goals. Whatever decisions the manager is taking for the organization, is it fulfilling the goals of the organization? Is it fulfilling the objectives of the organization? Is it matching with the vision, goals, mission of the organization? That also needs to be considered while taking any decision. So we can say that your goals, your vision, mission, objective may have an influence on your decision making. Next factors which should also be considered is a judgment made by the manager. If he is a good judgmenter, then only his decision will be most effective. If he is not in a position to decide or to take a correct judgment, then his decision may go wrong. So your judgment factor also has an influence on your decision making. Your values also comes in picture in the process of decision making. Like your values regarding giving importance to the things which is very much important, your values, your culture, we may have an influence on your decision making. Then comes the demand. Is it really needed? Whatever decision the manager is taking, is it really the need of the hour? Is there really a demand for that particular thing in the society? That also need to consider while taking any decision for the organization. And the last point is experience. How much experience the person is, that has a strong effect on your decision making. More the person is experienced, more will be the clarity in decision, more the person will be judgmental, more the person will be with a strong vision about that particular decision. So your experience may have an effect on your decision making. Effective decision making must be made to profit the organization, optimize some factors such as profit, employee welfare, market share, sales, etc. Now, when we are talking about profiting the organization, your decision should be such that it should be beneficial for the whole organization. It should not benefit only to some people, but the decision should be considering the whole organization. It should be beneficial to all, and whatever decisions you are taking, it should be always giving some kind of output or profit to the organization. It should be taken in such a way that it will also increase employee welfare. It should give job satisfaction to the employer. So your decision should be profit oriented, employee welfare oriented, and at the same time it should minimize loss, expenses and employee turnover. So when we are talking about it should minimize the loss, it should not happen that you are investing a lot of resources for carrying out that particular action, and when it comes to look at the output, it is minimum. So it should minimize the loss. It should not be very expensive. You should not spend a lot of resource. You should not spend a lot of money in carrying out that particular action, in implementing that particular decision. And at the same time, it should also minimize the employee turnover. You should not take into consideration a lot of energy of the people. Lot of people are involved in that particular decision, but when it comes to look at the output is very less. Decisions are taken both for growth and both for risk situation. So some of your decisions may be for undesirable situations and some of your decisions may be for desirable situation. Now what do you mean by desirable and undesirable situation? When any decision is taken for the growth and development of the organization, it is called as desirable situation. Sometimes it happens that some incidents happens and immediately manager has to take a decision. So that will be considered as an undesirable situation. So many of the time incidences like which is affecting the organization in a negative way, then manager immediately has to take some action. Say for example, there is some unrest in the society, there is some strike in the society, then the principal has to take a decision whether to close the school on that particular day or not. So these are the undesirable situation. So manager has to take a decision both for desirable and undesirable situations. It is very much important how to make better decisions. In order to make better decision, one has to increase one's knowledge. How to increase one's knowledge? By experience the thing, by doing research, by collecting information, By consulting the people, one can increase one's knowledge about that particular situation. Now, when one has to increase knowledge, one has to meet the people, consult the people who are expert in that particular action. So, in this way, one has to take the experience, one has to do the research. It is very much important to do the research. Now, in the process of doing research, one has to collect a lot of information regarding that particular decision. So, what the manager is doing in the process of getting knowledge about that particular situation, he is doing research, he is meeting people, he is consulting people, he is getting experience, because experience itself gives a lot of knowledge about that particular situation. In order to increase the knowledge, one can ask question. Now, this question can be asked to oneself, the question can be asked to the person who is expert in that particular area, and question can be asked to the person who has actually done that particular task. So, you can increase your knowledge by asking question, by gaining experience, by consulting, and also by doing research. So, it is very much important one has to have increased knowledge regarding that particular situation in the case of decision making. Second very much important point in the process of better decision making is use your intuition. One has to use one's cognitive processes in the process of decision making. And in order to use one's cognitive processes, one thinking, one reasoning, it involves a lot of knowledge and experience. So, many times your intuition helps you in taking better decision. In order to take a better decision, it is also very much important to realize the pros and cons. Now, in order to realize the pros and cons, one has to think of whatever alternatives available, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each alternative. So, what the person is doing, he is deciding the pros and cons. So, it is very much important to know the pros and cons of the situation whenever you are going to take any decision regarding any particular situation. In order to decide the pros and cons, one also need to compare with the objectives. Are my objectives are matching with my decisions? Whatever alternatives one had chosen, are those matching with the objectives, that also need to be considered. So, in order to find out the pros and cons, it is very much important to compare it with the objectives. Don't overstress on the finality of your decision. Remember that some decisions are forever, whereas there are some decisions which need to be changed. We cannot apply the same rules, same decisions for longer time, because as the situation changes, one has to change. So, don't overstress on finality of your decision. The decision which you have taken long back may not be applicable in present situation. So, there should be flexibility, there should be change in your decision. The decision which was applicable earlier may not be applicable in the current scenario. So, don't overstress on finality of your decision. It is very much important to find out or to know what is the correct time for taking that particular decision. So, you should also emphasize on the time. Is it really a time required for taking that particular action? That also need to be considered for taking better decision. There are two types of decision, program decision and non-program decision. Program decisions are very structured and they occurs with some frequency. Program decisions are routine, repetitive and objective in nature. Routine means every day the manager has to take a lot of decision for smooth functioning of the organization. So, many times he has to take a lot of repetitive decisions in the process of smooth functioning of the organization. So, these are routine, these are repetitive and these are objective in nature. It requires a systematic procedure to be implemented in implementing those decisions. Now, when we say it requires a systematic procedure, that means these are the decisions which are decided in advance. It requires a lot of planning for this kind of decision. These decisions are structured in nature. It requires a systematic procedure. It requires planning. Say for example, the manager prepares an activity chart for the teachers. What is expected them to do the activities for the whole year. So, for this the organizational chart is prepared, wherein the roles and the duties are assigned for the teacher. But next year it may happen there might be change in those particular activities. So, these are repetitive decisions, these are routine decisions and these are objective in nature. It requires a very systematic procedure, it requires in advance planning for these particular kind of decisions.